Okay.
All right, Nana, thank you so much for being here. Once again, really generous of you to
My
give your time.
pleasure.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
I'm glad to hear it. Today, I want to talk to you about Woods Hole. Right now, we're here in your beautiful home in Woods Hole, and I'm curious to hear about what it was like when you first came here. How did you come to be in Woods Hole for the first time?
I came to Woods Hole as a bride. I had been married 1 week. And on the way back from our week of honeymoon at Lake Winnipesaukee, Tom had to come back because he was committed for working with his advisor, his PhD advisor. And so that was my first time. And of course, his advisor was not too happy that Tom had gotten married because he felt sure it was going to take him away from his work. So he kept Tom in the lab from 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, and I would see him for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But that was, that's how it was. And I was off for the summer because I was teaching then, and we did have a car. So I had the use of the car while he was busy at the lab. And I drove all over the area here. I investigated all these little narrow roads and found little houses that were making and selling candles or selling herbs, fresh herbs and whatever. It was quite different then than it is now, much more rural then than now. But it's still rural now as well, but not as much as then. And don't forget, this was 1958. 1958.
Yeah, I'm curious. Can you expand more on that? Tell me how Woods Hole, the village of Woods Hole, looked different or felt different then compared to today.
There were some stores down on Water Street. The pharmacy was still there. And it had undergone some changes. I say still there, and I'm thinking of the pharmacy, but now it's not a pharmacy. Now it's the
Is it the Woods Hole Market?
no the eating place at the corner.
Ah, Quick's Hole.
Not Quick's Hole, the corner. The corner. My goodness.
Coffee-O?
Yes, it was Coffee-O. And now it's Coffee-O, no, but that was a pharmacy before. And it didn't have any deck outside. The building was straight down like any other building, and you entered it, and it was the pharmacy. And nearby, going past it toward the lab, so just go walking down toward the lab, was a barbershop. So it had different kinds of stores. And around the corner, as you go toward the ferry, was the Calhoun Fish Market. Calhoun he had his own boat and went out fishing, and he had a little market there, and he sold his fish. And much later, many years later, I became very friendly with the Calhoun family. Tammy Ammon is from the Calhoun family. Both Tammy and Doug are very good, very loyal members at the Church of the Messiah now. So I know Tammy for a long time, and I knew Tammy's mother when I started to live here year round. And those were both people, they were part of the Calhoun family. Of course, it's not there anymore, but sometimes the museum here will publish pictures, and they will show the Calhoun Market as it was so many years ago. And there was, at the Steamship Authority, was the terminal, the final terminal of the railroad that came from Manhattan here.
Wow.
And when I came here in 1958 during the summer, my mother and father came to visit us for a weekend, and we met them at the railroad right at the Steamship Authority.
Wow, that sure would be convenient now, huh?
It's amazing the things as I'm talking to you, how one thing connects with another. When my parents came, Tom and I were staying at the MBL dormitories, and so we arranged for them to have a room at a rooming house. That rooming house faced the Coast Guard station, and that was where they stayed. I didn't know the person then, but when I came back years later, I got to know her very well. And when she passed away, she left the house to her son, and her son and his wife were living in Hingham. And Joan knew them because their children all grew up together in the same high school. So now the son and his wife have moved and are living in that same house that the mother had owned. And that was the house my parents had stayed in so many years ago.
Wow.
Connections, right?
Seriously. You mentioned Tom, who was your husband, my grandfather. Can you
Yes.
give us a little background on, and you mentioned that he was working in the lab. Give us a little background on his on his profession. What was the lab? Why was he in a lab? What brought him there?
Okay, well, this connects with our last session when we talked about Tom, and I mentioned how I met him in French class. Well, we were both at that time psychology majors, and we had many classes together, so I knew him all through the 4 years of college. And when he graduated college, when we both graduated, I went on to Cornell for graduate work, and he went to one of the hospitals, big hospitals in New York City, and worked in the laboratory there, mostly doing blood work. And at that time, he visited me one time when I was at Cornell. He came for a weekend. So we still continued our friendship. And I guess he was deciding what his course of study was going to be, and he decided that he wanted to continue working in science. And so he then applied to Rutgers for a master's degree, and it went on into a PhD. So he did research and was working in the labs at Rutgers, with a professor. And it was this professor who had a lab at the MBL in the summertime and took Tom with him to work in the lab. And it was that professor that I just mentioned before was not so happy when Tom got married because he thought it would take him away, which it never did. And Tom's main interest over those years was in hematology, and so his specialty was the red blood cell. And he was a member of what he always called the Red Blood Cell Club, which was a rather elite organization of doctors and PhDs, scientists, whose interest was in working with blood.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the crossover between marine biology, him working at the Marine Biological Laboratory, and his work with red blood cells? Do you know specifically what the relation was?
After he got his PhD, several years later, he applied and came to the MBL and had a laboratory there. And his interest, as I just said, was the red blood cell. And the marine animal that he was using is the goosefish. Do you know what a goosefish looks like?
No, I don't.
Half of the goosefish's mouth. It's quite big, and it's quite ugly looking, but it had the blood that Tom was interested in. Unfortunately, the lab only brought in very few. I think in one summer I don't know if he had 6, and it wasn't enough. So he had to transfer his work to other fish. When he was doing research here and at the college in New York
At Rutgers?
No, he had graduated by then. He was working at City University. His interest was looking into the problems of sickle cell anemia. And so all the blood work that he was doing at that time was really geared to working with that particular illness. And he made some interesting observations and published them. Do you know what sickle cell anemia is?
No, I don't.
Well, it's an illness that is usually found in African Americans.
Oh, that's right. I did know that.
And the blood cells that a child is born with after a period of time, genetically, this is genetically governed, turn from round to sickle cell. Right? That's how it gets its name, like a little quarter moon. And what happens in the body as this progresses, and it usually doesn't indicate itself until the person is around 25 or 30 years old. And what happens when the blood changes shape, it connects with each other. They clog because if they're not round, that it doesn't slip through. The shape enables them to form clots, and eventually the person dies. So Tom was doing some very interesting research with the blood of, and his work was with the blood of the duck. And he would go to Long Island where they had duck farms, and he'd get the eggs and embryos, and he'd always come back with a little duckling too, and the kids would love it, and they would take turns taking it into school for show and tell. But the duck only stayed with us for a weekend and then went back to the lab. Poor little duck. But the kids loved it. The kids loved the duck. But anyhow, coming back to the embryos, he discovered that if you treated them, the eggs, the cells, the blood cells in the duck, he treated them with some particular chemicals. I'm not going into the origin of this, just the overview. And he found that when he did this with this one particular chemical, that it prevented the shape from changing from round to sickle.
Wow.
And he would try to follow it through, through the birth situation onto, and it was a very remarkable observation. And one of the papers, he wrote papers very frequently on the work that he did, and this one paper was published. And it had not ever been indicated before. However, a week later, in another journal, the findings were published by another group in England and came out a week later in another magazine, another journal. So it was quite a very, prestigious for him to have brought that out at that time. He was the first that came up with that conclusion. So at any rate, his work has always been mainly with the red blood cell.
And that's what brought him to Woods Hole.
And, he had been working with Dr. Green, his professor from Rutgers, doing whatever Dr. Green's projects were. But then when he came with his own interest. But the Marine Biological Laboratory is an institution that is well known throughout the world. It's not so well known here as it is outside. I was a tour guide for almost 20 years for the MBL, and it was always very interesting to meet the people in my tours and how little they really knew about what the MBL was all about. So anyhow, Tom applied and was accepted and had a laboratory which lasted for, as I said, about 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Going back a couple steps to Woods Hole, I've been lucky enough to grow up here in Woods Hole, and I always think of those of us who are from Woods Hole as being a very proud group of people, very proud to be from such a unique place, and very interested in sort of the marine science core that really is what feels like it's what makes Woods Hole Woods Hole. Do you feel like when you first came here that you fell in love with it immediately, or do you feel like it took a while for you to sort of find your groove?
I really didn't know anything about Woods Hole at all. All I knew was that Tom was working in a laboratory with his professor, and I didn't know anything other than that. And I'll tell you, a few years later, when summer came around and I said goodbye to my teachers, as we all left for summer vacation, and the dresses were distributed. That was a thing. At the end of the school, the faculty had the administration of the high school would write up everybody's summer address so people could keep in touch. And so the people who knew I was going to Woods Hole, which they had never heard anything about, but when I talked about it, they said, "Where in the world are you going? What a name, Woods Hole, and you live on Devil's Lane, and it's Memorial Circle, and you talk about Buzzards Bay." They said, "What in the world? What place are you in with all of these names?" So I never thought about it that way, but it's true that some of the names we have here are strange indeed.
They really are. They really are. And you know what's interesting is, and I just learned this not that long ago, is that the name Woods Hole, the hole, Hole, I think originates from maybe like a Scandinavian term that was Holl.
Yes, it was.
And I think that is supposed to describe the land feature, but I'm forgetting what.
You know what it describes?
Tell me.
Just as you leave Woods Hole by ship and you go out, there's a passageway that's rather treacherous. And everyone at the time, and this is from the 1600s on, people who navigated the area here knew that there was one place that was difficult to navigate if you're on a boat. And it became known as it was Hull, spelled Hull, long time ago. And in fact, you see that written on a stone. It was it was etched in a stone, Woods Hole, Holl.
Mm-hmm.
But the name subsequently changed, the spelling changed to Hole. And even today, they will talk about sailing through the hole.
Well, for anyone who's out there fishing today, I can tell you it has not changed much. Very treacherous pass.
So that's where it got its name.
Yeah. How old were your children when you purchased a home here, and how impactful do you think it was for them to grow up spending their summers here versus their school year in Queens?
They loved coming to Woods Hole. When I had children, I started coming, and I had started working. I had been working even before I was married. Well, the first time I came, I was on my honeymoon. We came that year. We came the second year. He was still working with Dr. Green. And we came the third year. And the third year, Joan was 6 months old.
And what was it like as a mother to have your kids spend their summers in Woods Hole?
They loved it. They loved it. Let's see. Joan was 10. Paul was 8. And Andrew was 4, I think. Something like that, 3.5 or 4. And they first of all, how can you not love going to the beach, living the kind of life we had here? There was the folk sing, there were movies for kids at different times, there were activities sponsored by the MBL for families. there was a lot going on for the children. And swimming, everyone had swimming lessons as well. So everybody was busy. And that was when Joan started science school at 10. And Paul also started science school at 8. Andrew was too young. And they loved it. Science school was wonderful. Wonderful for them. The beach, the swimming lessons, the friends, everybody. You know that the beach, Stony Beach, where everyone goes here, was called the MBL Beach. Everybody knows it as the MBL Beach because all the MBL people go there. So it was a family event, if you want to look at it that way, because everybody knew everybody else. And the kids had a ball.
And how ecstatic was Tom that his kids were going to be spending their summers in a marine science related camp?
He just felt that this was a wonderful summer vacation for everybody. But except him, he put in now he was his own boss, right? So he would. We arranged a schedule so that the kids were always busy earlier in the day with science school and swimming lessons and everything else. But in the afternoon was when we always went to the beach. We would get there about 2 o'clock and stay. And when Tom was finished, usually around 5, he would walk to the beach and spend the rest of the time on the beach with us, and then we'd come home and have dinner. So it was a pattern that Tom would work, but he'd also come in the afternoon when he was done, and it was vacation for him too. And then there were so many activities at the MBL, not just for children, but for the adults as well. We had the Friday night lectures. We had lots of activities going on with the MBL as for adults as well as for the kids.
I recall you telling me about how when Grandpa was working such late hours at the lab that you would maybe meet him at the lab or meet him somewhere else on a Friday night and get together with friends.
But that was when we were first here.
That was before you had children.
Right. We were just married one week, right? And then Tom was an assistant to his professor. He hadn't gotten his PhD yet. So he had to do whatever his professor wanted him to do, and his professor wanted him in the lab until 10 o'clock at night.
I want to pivot for a moment and talk about how involved you have always been in the community, not just in the decade that we're talking about now, but even later in life, you've remained so involved in your community. I'd like for you to talk about what ways have you found community and where you've been able to sort of find your niche, and how has that enriched your life today?
Well, are you talking about now?
I'm talking about now.
Because a lot of the things that I've done began many years ago.
Why don't we start there then? Start many years ago.
Okay. Well, when Tom was here doing research at the lab, and the children were involved in their activities, I volunteered at the MBL gift shop, and I did that every Thursday afternoon. I was at the gift shop together with Lorraine Mizell, the two of us. We were great friends and remained so until the end, right? But every Thursday afternoon, we were in charge of the gift shop. I did that for about 20 years. And at the same time that I was at the gift shop, I also volunteered at the Woods Hole Historical Museum, and I did that for about 9 or 10 years. And after that, I had stopped doing the gift shop volunteering, and I became a tour guide for the MBL. They had asked me initially if I would like to be a tour guide, and I said, I'm not a scientist. I said, what can I tell you about this institution when I'm not really a scientist? So I declined. And then that first year, I wondered what it was like, and I decided I'm going to take the tour, and I toured with a person who was also a scientist at the lab, but was volunteering as a tour guide. And I attended that tour, and everything she said, I knew. And I didn't realize it. I mean, I had been at the MBL now for 15 years, 20 years, longer, I don't remember. And I said to myself, you don't realize. I don't realize how much I got to know about the MBL and what they do and about the community. And since I attended this tour and I knew everything that the tour guide talked about, I volunteered to become a tour guide. And I did that for at least 20 years or more.
At least 20 years you were a tour guide.
Right.
Wow. And did you get any of the same satisfaction from being a tour guide as you did from teaching and sort of being a leader in a group?
You see, everything about giving people information and teaching them about things they didn't know and now they know gives me a great deal of satisfaction. And at one time, I had a Japanese group coming through, and I had been assigned. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting now. This was a group of high school students in Japan and this group had made arrangements with someone in the United States that arranges tours from students who live in Japan. But they are based in the United States. So when they came to the MBL, I had the Japanese students, and I also had their leader. There were a couple, one that came with them from Japan, and one that was the liaison and came who was based in the United States, and Japanese, but as Japanese as well. And it was fascinating because I had written my thesis on the Japanese language. And the title of that thesis was The American English Pronunciation Problems of the Native Speaker of Japanese. And so here they were, and the person who was based in the United States but was with them was the translator, because they all came and no one was speaking English. So everything that I said I had to say more slowly, but I understood what problems they were having because I knew what sounds they were having difficulty with. And I also understood that when a student learns English in another country, although the words are the same, the pronunciations are not. And sometimes, because the pronunciations are different, you don't understand what they're saying. And it's very, very clear to me, and I'm sure it's clear to a lot of people, that even though you say the word in English, people don't understand you. And that's because either the emphasis on the word is different, or the pronunciation of a sound is not exactly the same. And when you are putting this together in a sentence, and you have all these phases, these impacts from all of these reasons, it's so easy not to understand. So when they came, and I knew that it was happening, so that I was really very careful with my pronunciation. And as a result, they were understanding me more than they had expected to. And at one point, one of the students, these were seniors from high school in Japan, one of the students tapped me on the shoulder and in English slowly said, because before I tell you what he said, I had told them that the MBL has a signed book of the origin of species by Darwin. Mm-hmm. And so when he heard that, he tapped me on the shoulder and in very slow English said, "May we see the book. And I paused for a second and I said, hold on, just a moment. And I went across the hall and I asked the librarian if it was possible for them to bring out the Origin of Species that Darwin had signed, because I have a group from Japan and they would love to see it. And they said, just give us 10 minutes and we will get it. And so with this group, we went outside the normal tour and I brought them down to the room where all these treasures. You have no idea what treasures the MBL has. Unbelievable. And we went down and I had told them, I have a group of Japanese students, right, who would like to see this book. Well, they brought not only the book out to show, but they also brought the remnants that they had of a visit a couple of years earlier by the Emperor of Japan, who was a scientist himself and had visited the MBL. And they had photographs of this emperor writing a note or signing a book at the MBL. And they showed the picture and they showed the students the actual chair and desk at which the emperor sat, because we were in the same room. And those students and their leaders were absolutely thrilled, so much so that each student had to sit in the chair and have his picture taken, and including the moderators, including the adults. So we had to take a little time off for everyone to sit in the chair, get their picture taken, because this was the chair in which the emperor had actually sat. And while this was happening, I was talking with one of the leaders, and the leader said, in Japan, they have in a museum furniture that was in the palace or with the emperor or whatever, and they said it's all roped off. They can see it, but they can't touch it. This is the first time that any of these people have actually sat in a chair in which the emperor had sat.
Wow.
And that was a big deal.
What a treat.
What a treat. It was great for the librarians, the staff, to do all that, right? Mm-hmm. It was wonderful. Well, that was my first tour of the Japanese group, and they came every year. And every year I was their tour guide, because I had told the people who arranged the tours here at the MBL that I had done my thesis with the Japanese language, and I really had a connection. And so every time they came, and they also asked for me when they booked the tour, because they knew that I spoke slowly, I was aware of their sounds, they understood me. And when a normal person speaks, they don't always understand.
Yeah, you really...
To give you an example of how stress changes. Oh dear, let me think of what it was. I have them all on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't. It's so easy to misunderstand when you stress the wrong syllable in a word, or when you change a sound. So I'll just have to leave it at that for now.
That's so nice that you were able to develop a real connection with them and then earn their repeat business for the years going forward.
Yes. And every time they came, they gave me a box of candy. And when they left, I always brought it up to the staff. And they knew that when the Japanese come, they all get a box of candy up there.
Oh, that's so nice of them. I'm curious. What was your motivation for spending your summers volunteering versus getting another job? I know a lot of teachers that spend their summers working as a bartender or working in this, and that, but you chose to spend your time volunteering.
I had children too. I had young children as well. And the thought never occurred to me. Listen, I worked full time and I worked hard when I worked during the school year. And this was just a change of everything. And I was busy. It wasn't that I wasn't doing anything. I was really very busy with the things that I did. And I loved what I was doing. And I was available for my children. And I was there for whatever they needed.
Well, I know firsthand just how much you love volunteering because you still volunteer today. You volunteer with the Falmouth Education Foundation, you volunteer with the Woods Hole Women's Club. I'm sure I'm missing a handful, but volunteering has always been a big part of your life. And I'm curious to know, in the later years of your life, you're 95 right now, what is the impact that volunteering, your time and your skills has in enriching your life?
You asked me a while ago, not today, but at a different session, what it is that gets me going in the morning. Remember?
I remember.
And I told you that I get up and I want to know what it is I'm doing today. Well, it's wonderful to get up and say and think, what am I doing today? Oh, today there's a meeting. We have an FEF, Falmouth Education Foundation, an FEF meeting once a month, the program committee, that we're the ones that read all the grants and visit all the teachers subsequent to that. We meet, and they meet here. I'm so happy because I don't have to travel anywhere. And every month we have a meeting as to what has to be done. And then we plan our itinerary in terms of who goes where and what have we seen and what is so special about the programs that we've paid for through the teacher efforts. It's amazing, amazing. If you think that I was enthusiastic about teaching, and I was very much so, you have no idea how enthusiastic I am when I go into a classroom and I see what the teacher is doing with all those students in the class that is learning in a manner beyond what you would ever expect. These children are so lucky to have teachers who think about enrichment programs, ideas to make learning for the kids more meaningful, more wonderful, more eye-opening, more of a life in school. Those children will never forget the learning that went on in a classroom by the teachers who had the desire to go out on a limb and work harder to make a program available that would not have been available. And these teachers do not get any money for this. Our grants do not go for salaries for teachers. They go for the project that they asked for. It's unbelievable. So I think you can see that I'm so enthusiastic, and I love going into a classroom and seeing the wonderful, wonderful work that's being done. I'll tell you one thing. When I was a teacher in my high school, we had a shop department, which is fine, and they learned woodworking, and they learned building, and they learned different skills, manual skills, and that was wonderful. Well, here in Falmouth, they have similar teachers who are doing similar things. And I watched a teacher over the years who built his class program from what I would call a shop into a pre-engineering course, which is unbelievable. That would never have happened when I was a teacher in high school. It wouldn't have happened because they didn't have what they have here with a group like the FEF, like the Falmouth Education Foundation, who collects money through galas that we host and donations that come in to enable a teacher such as this one particular person, and that's only an example, there are others that do the same, who enables this teacher to go from one area of expertise into more and more and more and more. It's just unbelievable.
Wow, I can tell that you've fostered some really nice relationships with those teachers, and hopefully they're fostering really even better relationships with their students with these new resources, right?
Let me tell you, the kids love them. The kids remember their teachers. In fact, your brothers had this particular teacher in high school when they went through. I don't know whether you were one or not, but at any rate, he's going strong.
That's great. That's great to hear. Bringing it back around to students and teachers, I think one of the most magnificent stories that I know from you, which is an ongoing story, is the relationship that you've upheld with one of your first ever students. Can you take me back in time and tell that story?
Yes. Well, I've been when I was teaching, I was in many ways a mentor to some of these students. And when I first started my very first class in dramatics at Jamaica High School, and they never knew that I had never taught this course before in my life, but they always got a kick out of this little experience. I was young, right? I was young, but I was the teacher. And if the monitor came into the room, she'd look around to see where is the teacher that she had to give this message to. And then she wouldn't see anybody, so she'd ask the class, where's your teacher? They were tickled pink, and they'd all point to me. I might have been on the side of the room, or I might, because I never sat at a desk, I said that. And so they would point to me, and then the monitor would come and give me the message. But they always would love it if someone came in for a message because they never could find where the teacher was because I was so young at the time.
How old were you?
Let me see. I must have been, it was before I was married. I must have been 24, 23, 24.
Wow.
Right? And these are 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds.
And so when was this your favorite student? Oh, I'm sure there's no such thing as a favorite student.
Well, in this first class of dramatics, there were a group of four girls that were very friendly. And at the end of that semester, they went to my chairperson to ask what I would be teaching next year. And my chairman told them I was teaching public speaking next year. And those same four all registered, and they came into my public speaking class, which I had never taught before because I was this is my first in a high school. I came from a speech therapy background, and they did the same thing. And then it was a substitute for English, but they could only be away from the English department for 1 year. So after those classes, they had to go back. But we did have minor classes that weren't majors that you could take in addition to your regular program. So I saw them also in some of those classes later. So this was a student, an American student, who was taking my class in the speech arts. But then I told you that years later, we developed an English as a second language program. And then, little by little, most of my work was with ESL. And one of the students, a number of students kept in touch with me when they graduated. One of them was this young man from Colombia, and his sister also was in my class. His sister was 2 years younger than he was. He must have been 17 when I first had him in a class, and his sister was 15. His sister was beautiful. She was tall and beautiful, And she had other classes, and not just mine. And some of the people in my department would say, have you seen this person? And it would give me the name. And I said, oh, yes. I mean, I have it for the double periods or triple periods because of the English. And they said, I can't take my eyes off. And these are the teachers who are saying, well, how beautiful. And she was really very beautiful. Anyhow, with this, the fellow was in my classes for quite a while and then, graduated out of my program. And he went on to college, and he went on to graduate school, and he got his PhD and was a principal in a school in Brooklyn. And every year, for the first 10 years after he graduated, every year he would send me a bottle of champagne for Christmas. That was so pretty, so nice. And I've kept in touch with him over the years. And at Christmas time, always at Christmas time, we connect.
That's very nice. That's very nice.
And he's retired now. He retired about 5 or 6 years ago. So that's how old he is now.
Wow.
Well, I'm 95, so it doesn't take much to know that my students are retired.
Well, you've kept alive so many wonderful friendships in your life. Like the one you just mentioned, I think about Mary and Mario, who come and you host them still multiple times a year. They come and visit. Your friend Grazia Rosenberg comes to visit. Do you have any advice for people on maintaining long distance friendships, maintaining relationships over such a long period of time? What does it take to keep those alive?
You said alive. That's what it does for me. It keeps me alive. Not just the friendship, but the person. You need a social environment in your lifetime. You do work, you have family, which is so important, but you need the socialization both of family members and of non-family members. I think this is so important. I was just reading an article about growing older, and they said the most common complaint among the elderly is loneliness. And it is so important to try to maintain a social relationship with your friends. It's unfortunate that when you reach my age, many of my peers aren't here anymore. And so you can understand that when you're only the one or two left of your peers, it is sad. It is sad. But I am so lucky. I am so lucky that I have family around as well. And I'm so fortunate in the fact that I keep busy with even today, with my volunteer work. I'm with the FEF, I love it. With the Woods Hole Women's Club, I'm very involved. I'm on the board. I know what's going on. I'm part of planning activities. I am so lucky that at my age, even though I walk slowly, my mind still is active. And I think that's what you need to have. And I happen to be a very, very fortunate and blessed person.
So keep the calendar busy, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
And I've seen your calendar, and it's pretty busy. And I know you always say to me, whenever we go to schedule something, to schedule having breakfast or lunch together, and we break out your calendar, and the first thing you say is you have to take a moment and pause and say, look at this. Look at this. How lucky am I? Here I am. I'm 95 years old. I've got all of this on my calendar. How lucky am I? How blessed am I?
So true. So true.
Well, thanks again for having a conversation with me. I love you so much. I'm really looking forward to us doing it again soon.
Thank you for doing this. There, you see how lucky I am? That I have my grandson who's able to do all this, put it all together, and have me so that I'm still with you when I'm no longer physically here. I'm still with you.
Well, it has been my honor and my duty to help preserve your legacy.
Thank you.
All right. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.